China. I talked about this in the first half hour of the program. Our intelligence agencies believe China's spying on us, which probably a lot of countries are. They also are suspected of hacking into our computer system. Hong Kong residents are scared witless of them. We know 60 Minutes last night was talking about manipulation of governments in the Pacific. And the New York Times overnight ran quite a lot of detail on leaked documents about concentration camps run by the Chinese government, locking up in re-education camps the Uygher community, Muslim group in China's northwest, more than 1 million people. In the studio with me is a member of the Uygher community here in Australia. She's born in Melbourne. Nuria Khasim, thank you for coming in.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Now, when my producer called this morning, you thought what?
So your producer called me around 7:20 a.m. and my first instinct was that he was possibly a Chinese spy. For all Uyghurs who are involved in activism, that is a real concrete threat for us. And it was actually very atypical of me to have taken a phone call from a number that I didn't recognize because, the threat of Chinese spies is very real for us.
Within Australia, there are Chinese spies?
Within Australia, there are Chinese spies. Of course, I don't have any, I can't make concrete claims about how many or where, but what I do know is that for activists like me and my family members, in our every move, we are worried that potentially someone is watching us because the Chinese government is very powerful and the Chinese government has a lot of power in Australia and in Melbourne in particular.
Well, obviously they'd be monitoring what you say now.
Yeah, well, I would not be surprised at all if they were listening right now.
Okay. Now, do you have family still in the northern region?
Yes, I do. All of my extended family on my mother's side is in the northern region of China, Xinjiang, as the Chinese government calls it, or East Turkestan, as we prefer to call it. I have not been able to go home for the past 4 or 5 years. I haven't been able to see my family because since the government has unveiled these re-education centres or concentration camps, going home has become synonymous with the possibility of arbitrary detention, and this means that I haven't been able to see my family.
Has your family or any of your friends been put into the re-education camps?
Yes, so no one in my immediate family. However, a few of my friends, their fathers have been detained. One of my family friends' father is detained, and one of my grandma's colleagues who watched me grow up is already detained as well.
For how long have they been detained?
Years.
Years?
Years. So these concentration camps are a long-term re-education initiative. As seen in the leaked documents, the Chinese government repeatedly uses this language of disease to refer to them. It's for people infected with, quote, an ideological illness, unquote. Or it's a detox centre for the mind. And because of this very abstract imagery of a disease, it means that the government can implicate anyone. How am I meant to be able to give proof that someone has an ideological illness, right? So because of how vague this is, it means that over 1 million people have been detained without trial, without evidence, and without proper charges.
How are they treated?
The conditions in the camps are terrible. They are unhygienic. According to one Kazakh woman who has escaped, they had buckets for toilets. 60 people were in one room, and in the duration that she was there, over 10 of those people died in her room. There are allegations of rape, torture. Muslims are forced to denounce their religion, learn the Chinese language, praise the Chinese Communist Party, who is responsible for their detention. And most recently, there have been allegations of morgues being built within close vicinity of these supposedly re-education centres.
What is the concern about extermination?
Yes, the concern of extermination is very real for us. It's a slow-moving genocide, and perhaps not so slow-moving anymore. It's very terrifying for me as a young woman living in Melbourne to be bearing such cultural trauma, and unfortunately the entirety of my community is suffering throughout this with me.
Why is it happening?
As a politics student, I can very much, see from a political science perspective that the Chinese government wants to assert its sovereignty and national security, and since as seen in the leaked papers, actually, since 9/11 and the American War on Terror, China has very much fed into this discourse of Islamophobia. And because we are Muslim, our religion renders us a threat to Chinese stability, when in reality, I would argue that it is the Chinese government who is perpetrating acts of terror onto my people.
You can never go back to China now, can you?
No. So that's been something really hard for me to come to terms with. I lost both of my grandpas in the past 12 months, and I haven't been able to go home to say goodbye or attend the funerals. My aunt passed away in April. We were incredibly close, but I couldn't see her for the last few months of her life. I was too scared to even talk to her because Uyghurs have been detained simply for contacting relatives who are overseas. So I feel like I'm living in a surreal nightmare where I can't talk to the people who I love the most while, our government continues to have, trade and diplomatic alliances with the Chinese government.
Well, now we've had 2 members elected representatives of the people, man. What do you think the Australian government should do?
I think that the Australian government, first of all, should not have signed the One Belt, One Road initiative as
That was
Premier...
the Victorian government, yeah.
Yeah, but as Premier Daniel Andrews did. I think that the Australian government should actually be imposing, alongside the the international community, should be imposing economic sanctions and trade embargoes on China, because it is only these uses of hard economic power that can actually potentially threaten or act as a wake-up call for the Chinese government, because soft pleas and, public condemnation is not enough. This government is running rampant, and it is completely trampling on everything that the Australian community supposedly holds dear.
Is it going to get worse?
Yes. There is no doubt that it's going to get worse. Since the camps have been unveiled in 2016, they have grown exponentially. And as more people are coming forward with their anecdotal stories of what is happening inside of them, there is no doubt that it's getting worse. And of course, we also need to look at the long-term ramifications of these camps. There are entire villages in my homeland where you won't see any men or boys above the age of 15 because they have all been detained. What this means is that there are a lot of children who are homeless, who are now raised by the state, indoctrinated with propaganda. And it also means that there are a lot of Uyghur women who are now being coerced by the state to marry Han Chinese men in an attempt to essentially breed our culture out of existence. And I think it's terrifying.
Is it appropriate to call them concentration camps?
I believe so, yes. They are very similar to the concentration camps of World War II. Firstly, because people are being detained without trial and without proper reason. Secondly, people are being detained on the basis of their ethnicity and religious affiliation. And finally, the conditions in the camps, including the fact that there is forced labour camps have been involved. These are harrowingly parallel to the concentration camps. And I volunteer extensively with the Jewish community in Australia, and it is just so heartbreaking for me to witness all the heartache that they have gone through generationally, and knowing that that is likely going to be the future of my community unless the world steps in. And so far, not much has happened.
So should the world step in as it did on South Africa? Do you see a similar sort of reaction?
Yes, I do. I believe that historically the world has a tendency to step in too late. There's a responsibility to protect doctrine enshrined in a 2005 UN World Summit, where we agreed as a world that if one country is unable to protect the human rights of its citizens, then the international community needs to step in to prevent these mass atrocity crimes. And often the community waits until there is evidence of slaughter to do so. And I think that we need preemptive intervention, because I think that the human rights of over 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minority groups is more important than the sovereignty of China.
How do you see Hong Kong unfolding? There are fears there at the moment that the students are trapped in the university. The authorities are talking about using live rounds against them, live ammunition.
Yeah.
There are some people fearing we're on the verge of a massacre. Is it getting that bad, do you think?
Yes, I do. The Uyghur community has actually been represented at several protests in support of the Hong Kong community. We believe that they are doing what we can't do because we're not home and we can't mobilize the way that they can. I believe that the pro-democracy protesters of Hong Kong are facing the threat of massacre, which is why it is so brave of them to continue to flout the authority of the Chinese government and really fight for democracy. And honestly, they're not just fighting for Hong Kong, they're fighting for everywhere else.
You've given us a passionate and articulate version of what's going on. The Chinese government gives us another one. Why should we believe you? Okay,
so the Chinese government calls them, vocational training centres that are free and accessible for everyone and actually a good thing, right? However, as the New York Times has leaked 400 pages of internal communications, that is concrete evidence of what the government is doing. So you shouldn't believe me. You should believe the Chinese Communist Party for what they're saying themselves.
Thank you so much for coming in.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Nuria Khasim, a member of the Uygher community here in Melbourne, 96 900 693 13 13 32.